I stared at the half-eaten short ribs on my plate, the subtle bitterness lingering on my tongue like a warning. The elegant dining room in my son's Georgetown home suddenly felt suffocating. Despite the perfectly arranged flower centerpieces and the soft classical music playing in the background, something was terribly wrong. Andrew's smile seemed practiced, too perfect, as he watched me from across the table. His wife, Samantha, kept glancing at her phone, her manicured fingers tapping nervously against the crisp white tablecloth. The celebration lunch, in my honor, felt more like a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was apparently meant to play the role of the unsuspecting victim. At 65, I've learned to trust my instincts. They've served me well through decades of teaching at the university, through raising Andrew alone after his father's death, and through countless, careful financial decisions that built our family's security. Those same instincts were now screaming at me to pay attention. "More wine, Mom." Andrew's voice carried that artificial sweetness I'd begun noticing lately, especially when money was involved. I declined with a slight shake of my head, my mind racing through possibilities. The bitter taste in the food wasn't a cooking mistake. It was deliberate, with a casualness born from years of handling difficult classroom situations. I stood up slowly. "Samantha, dear, would you mind trying these short ribs? Andrew's special sauce seems different today, and I'd love your opinion on it." Before anyone could object, I switched our plates with a steady hand. The next few moments played out like a scene from a movie I never wanted to star in. Samantha, perhaps too caught up in their scheme to realize what I'd done, took a bite. Within seconds, her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward, her face nearly landing in the plate I had just declined. I turned to face my son, my only child, whom I'd supported through every stage of his life. The boy for whom I'd established a secret trust fund, paying $6,000 monthly for 15 years to maintain his luxurious lifestyle. The man who had just attempted to drug his own mother, Andrew. I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions inside me. "I believe we need to have a conversation about respect, gratitude, and consequences." His face drained of color as he realized their plan had backfired. The perfect colonial house around us, the expensive furniture, the life he'd built, all of it rested on the foundation of my silent generosity. And now, in this beautifully decorated dining room that my money had helped furnish, my son had tried to harm me. The weight of this betrayal pressed against my chest, but I refused to show weakness. Years of being the invisible support system, the silent benefactor, the taken-for-granted mother, it all crystallized in this moment of clarity. As Samantha began to stir, groggy and confused, I reached for my phone. It was time to call Jonathan, my lawyer, and activate the trust's rescission clause. Sometimes the greatest act of love is setting firm boundaries, even when it breaks your heart. The drive back to my ranch in the Catskills gave me time to reflect on the path that led to this devastating Sunday lunch. 25 years of teaching. Medieval literature at the university had taught me that every story has its roots buried deep in the past, and mine was no exception. I still remember the morning everything changed. Andrew was 7, sitting at our small kitchen table with a bowl of Cheerios, when the call came about James's heart attack. Within hours, I wasn't just a professor anymore. I was a widow with a young son and a mortgage. The faculty lounge buzzed with sympathetic whispers, but I didn't have time for pity. I had a child to raise. Those early years blur together. In my memory, grading papers late into the night after tucking Andrew in, stretching my associate professor's salary to cover both private school tuition and violin lessons, learning to fix leaky faucets because hiring a plumber meant dipping into Andrew's college fund. I wore the same 3 blazers in rotation, darning small holes and replacing buttons, while ensuring Andrew always had new clothes for the start of each school year. The small ranch in the Catskills became our sanctuary. I bought it with my inheritance and James's life insurance, choosing it carefully for its potential rather than its immediate charm. The roof needed work, and the kitchen was straight out of 1975. But the land spoke to me. 40 acres of rolling hills and dense forest, where Andrew could run free during summer breaks, while I worked on research papers at the weathered picnic table, my coffee going cold as I lost myself in ancient texts. Every decision I made was calculated, every investment carefully considered. My colleagues chuckled at my frugal lunches, thermoses of homemade soup and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, not knowing I was channeling those savings into mutual funds and bonds. While they updated their wardrobes and took European vacations, I was building a financial fortress for my son's future, brick by careful brick. Andrew never knew about the nights I sat at my desk, calculating and recalculating our budget, making sure we could afford his school trips and summer camps without compromising his college fund. I didn't tell him about the prestigious conference invitations I declined, because the registration fees could better serve his education. Being a good mother, I believed, meant creating opportunities without broadcasting the sacrifice. When he brought home Samantha during his senior year of college, I recognized the look in his eyes. The same one James had when we first met. A mixture of love and ambition. They married shortly after graduation, young and full of dreams, bigger than their entry-level salaries could support. That's when I made the decision to establish the trust fund, my silent gift to their future. Looking back now, as my car winds through the familiar curves leading to my ranch, I wonder if I made a mistake in keeping my financial support so discreet. Did my silence about the sacrifices and careful planning somehow contribute to Andrew's sense of entitlement? Did my desire to give him everything his father couldn't ultimately rob him of the chance to develop gratitude and resilience? The gravel crunches under my tires as I pull up to my home, the evening sun casting long shadows across the renovated porch. This place, with its worn wooden floors and walls lined with books, represents every choice I've made, every sacrifice offered on the altar of motherhood. Now it will become my fortress of a different kind, not one of silent giving, but of necessary boundaries. The first time I noticed something was wrong was during Claire's 13th birthday party. I'd arrived early to help with preparations, my arms full of carefully wrapped presents, including the violin she'd been eyeing at her music school. The house in Georgetown was buzzing with the kind of expensive chaos that only professional party planners can create. "Oh, Margaret," Samantha said, taking the presents with that tight smile I'd grown familiar with. "You can help by arranging these napkins." She gestured to a stack of artisanal paper napkins, while the party planner, whose services I'd secretly funded, directed caterers around us. I was being dismissed to a corner, like a helpful neighbor rather than the grandmother who'd made this entire lifestyle possible. That evening I watched from the periphery as Andrew and Samantha held court among their friends, successful couples from his bank and her social circle. They told stories about their recent trip to the Amalfi Coast, never mentioning that it was my trust fund that had paid for their luxury suite and private tours. I sat quietly, sipping water, remembering how Andrew used to proudly introduce me as my mom, the professor, at his college events. The pattern became clearer over the following months. Holiday dinners where my input was politely ignored. Family photos where I was positioned at the edge, easily croppable. When I called to arrange lunch with Andrew, his secretary always seemed to have a prepared excuse. The same secretary whose salary was partially subsidized by my monthly transfers. "Mom, "We're thinking of renovating the kitchen," Andrew mentioned during one of our rare phone conversations. "The contractor estimates it'll cost around $90,000. His voice carried that familiar tone, casual yet expectant. No question. Was directly asked, but the implication hung in the air like heavy perfume. I approved the transfer, as I always did. 2 weeks later, I drove past their house and saw not just kitchen renovations, but a complete exterior redesign in progress. The $6,000 I sent monthly had become such a given that they felt comfortable stretching it, assuming I would cover any shortfall without question. During family gatherings, I started noticing the whispered conversations between Andrew and Samantha, the way they'd stop talking when I approached. Claire, my bright-eyed granddaughter, was the only one who still seemed genuinely happy to see me. She'd curl up next to me on their expensive sofa, showing me her violin progress videos or telling me about her dreams of becoming a musician. "Grandma," she said one evening, her voice low, "why do Mom and Dad act so weird about money? I heard them talking about your trust thing last night." I smoothed her hair, my heart heavy. Sometimes, sweetheart, when people receive help for too long, they forget it's help and start seeing it as something they're owed. The breaking point came during last year's Thanksgiving. I'd spent hours preparing James's traditional stuffing recipe, the one Andrew had loved as a child. When I arrived, Samantha informed me that they'd hired a chef who had prepared a modern take on Thanksgiving dinner. My casserole dish was relegated to the back of the counter, untouched. Later that evening, as I helped clean up, despite the hired help, I overheard Samantha on the phone with her sister. "It's exhausting, having to manage her expectations. I mean, yes, she helps us financially, but does that mean we have to include her in everything? Andrew says we just need to keep her happy until the trust matures." I stood there, half-empty wine glass in hand, feeling the weight of years of silent generosity turn to stone in my stomach. The words, "keep her happy," echoed in my mind, transforming my decades of sacrifice into something ugly and transactional. That night, driving home to my ranch, I made my first call to Jonathan, my lawyer. Not to take action, not yet, but to understand my options. Little did I know that their manipulation would escalate from emotional to something far more sinister. The bitter taste of those drugged enchiladas was just the culmination of years of growing entitlement and declining respect. The first night, after the failed lunch celebration, I sat in my study at the ranch, surrounded by decades of financial records I'd meticulously kept. My hands didn't shake as I reviewed the documents. Years of managing department budgets had taught me the value of steady focus in crisis moments. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting shadows on spreadsheets that told a story of systematic exploitation. "Your mother's getting suspicious," I remembered overhearing Samantha say to Andrew at Christmas, when they thought I was napping on the porch. "We need to do something before she changes her mind about the trust." At the time, I dismissed it as paranoid chatter. Now, those words took on a sinister new meaning as I calculated the total amount I'd given them over the years. $864,000 in trust payments alone, not counting Claire's education, their wedding, or the countless emergency transfers. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I did what I'd always done when facing a difficult situation. I made a plan. My laptop glowed in the darkness as I drafted emails to Jonathan, my lawyer, and created a detailed timeline of every financial transaction, every suspicious conversation, every moment of disrespect I'd quietly endured. The professor in me couldn't help but approach it like a research project, complete with citations and cross-references. Document everything. Jonathan had advised during our preliminary discussions months ago. Your generosity shouldn't become your vulnerability. How right he'd been. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made during the lunch, a habit I'd developed after noticing Andrew's increasingly erratic behavior. The sound of my own calm voice asking Samantha to taste the enchiladas felt surreal now. Dawn found me still at my desk, but with a clear strategy forming. The trust's rescission clause was my weapon, but timing would be crucial. Andrew's position at First Federal Bank added a layer of irony to my plan. He would be forced to process his own home's foreclosure. Years of teaching Chaucer had taught me the power of poetic justice. I took a break to walk through my garden as the sun rose. The tomato plants needed staking, and the herbs were ready for harvesting. There was something grounding about tending to living things that actually appreciated care. Unlike my financial nurturing of Andrew and Samantha, these plants gave back in honest measure. Back in my study, I began drafting a series of letters. One to Claire, explaining everything in case something happened to me. One to the Board of Trustees at First Federal Bank, documenting Andrew's ethical breaches. And one to my son himself, which I knew I might never send. Writing had always helped me process my thoughts, and these letters became my silent confidants. Dear Andrew, I typed, then deleted, then typed again. The day your father died, I promised him I would give you everything you needed to succeed. But somewhere along the way, I confused needs with wants. And in doing so, I failed you. As a mother, the letter continued for pages, but I saved it without sending. Instead, I picked up my phone and made 3 calls. First to my bank to freeze all additional trust payments, then to Claire's school to ensure her tuition would continue to be paid, directly and finally to a security company to upgrade my home system. The attempt to drug me had shaken my sense of safety, but it had also awakened something I thought I'd lost, my sense of self-preservation. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the Catskills in shades of amber and purple. For the first time in years, I felt not just angry or hurt, but powerful. I had spent decades building a life of quiet dignity, and no amount of manipulation or betrayal could take that away from me. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Not just protecting my assets, but reclaiming my identity beyond the role of silent benefactor. The email from Jonathan arrived at precisely 9 a.m. All documents prepared, ready to proceed when you give the word. I sat at my kitchen counter, morning light streaming through windows that needed washing, and took a deep breath, the china teacup in my hand, one of the few items I'd kept from my faculty office, felt like an anchor to reality. I clicked send on my response without hesitation. Within minutes, a cascade of automated notifications began flooding. Andrew's inbox, trust payment suspended, rescission clause activated, 30-day foreclosure notice initiated. The irony wasn't lost on me that these notifications would arrive while he sat at his desk at First Federal Bank, where he'd have to process his own financial downfall. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Andrew's name flashed on the screen, then Samantha's, then Andrew's again. I let them go to voicemail, remembering how often my own calls had been ignored over the past year. Instead, I focused on my next task, calling Claire's school to set up a direct payment arrangement for her tuition and activities. Mrs. Harrison, the school's financial administrator said warmly, "We can certainly arrange that. Claire is one of our most promising music students. My granddaughter's talent had always been genuine, unlike her parents' carefully crafted facade of success." The next call was to my old colleague, Dr. Eleanor Wright, who'd recently retired from the university's financial advisory board. "Margaret," she said after I explained the situation, I've been waiting for you to wake up to this. Let's move your investments to more secure accounts, ones they can't touch even if they try legal action. By noon, I had reorganized my entire financial structure. The only funds still flowing would be those directly supporting Claire's education and development. The trust that had been feeding Andrew and Samantha's luxurious lifestyle was now officially terminated, with all documentation of their recent attempt to drug me safely stored with multiple lawyers. The afternoon brought the first wave of text messages. "Mom, there must be some mistake with the trust payments. Please call us back, this is serious. You're overreacting about Sunday. We can explain everything. Do you realize what this will do to our reputation?" That last one made me pause. Reputation! I thought about all the times I'd been relegated to the background at their social events, introduced as a mere afterthought despite being the invisible foundation of their prestigious lifestyle. I typed out a single response. "I understand reputation very well. Perhaps it's time you built one based on your own merits." As the sun began to set, I drove into town to the local bank branch. The manager, who knew me from my years of careful investing, helped me set up new security protocols on all my accounts. "And how's that granddaughter of yours doing with the violin?" he asked as we finished the paperwork. "My wife says she was incredible at the spring recital." "She's finding her own voice," I replied, thinking how Claire's honest passion for music stood in stark contrast to her parents' orchestrated life. Returning home, I found a large manila envelope in my mailbox. Jonathan's office had worked quickly. Inside were copies of all the trust documentation, bank transfers, and a detailed timeline of Sunday's events, including my recorded conversation during the lunch. The final page was a notice of criminal intent, ready to be filed if Andrew and Samantha tried anything else. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old research notes on medieval women's literature. My thesis on power dynamics in Chaucer's Wife of Bath's tale suddenly felt startlingly relevant. The wife's famous line echoed in my mind. "We desire dominion." But what I desired wasn't dominion. It was simply respect, recognition, and the right to exist as more than a silent source of financial support. I stayed up late, reading and making notes, rediscovering the scholar I'd been before I became. Solely Andrew's mother, or Claire's grandmother. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more angry calls, more attempts at manipulation. But tonight, in my study surrounded by books and memories of my teaching days, I felt my professional identity awakening alongside my personal strength. The sound of coyotes calling in the distance seemed to celebrate with me. A chorus of wild, untamed voices refusing to be silenced. The first sign of real panic came 3 days after I activated the trust's rescission clause. I was tending to my herb garden when a black SUV came roaring up my gravel driveway, spewing stones in its wake. Andrew burst out of the driver's side, his typically perfectly pressed suit wrinkled, his face flushed with a combination of anger and fear. "Mom, you have to stop this." His voice carried across my front yard, scaring a pair of cardinals from my bird feeder. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to us? To my career?" I continued cutting my lavender, the familiar scent keeping me grounded. "I believe I understand exactly what I'm doing, Andrew. The same way I understood exactly what you and Samantha attempted to do to me on Sunday." My voice remained steady, though my hands wanted to shake. That was a mistake. We weren't thinking clearly." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. "But this is our life you're destroying. The board is asking questions about the foreclosure notices. Do you know how it looks when a bank manager can't pay his own mortgage?" I finally looked up from my gardening. About as bad as it looks when a son tries to drug his mother at a family lunch, I imagine. The color drained from his face. You can't prove that. Actually, I can. I stood up slowly, brushing soil from my gardening apron. The recording of our conversation, the medical report from the hospital where Samantha was treated after consuming the food meant for me, and the toxicology analysis of the remaining enchiladas, they tell quite a story. Jonathan has copies of everything. Andrew took a step back, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass. You've been planning this? No, son. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. I walked toward my porch, where a pitcher of iced tea sat waiting. Would you like some tea? I made it myself, and I'm happy to drink from the same pitcher. The barb landed. He flinched visibly. Mom, please, we can work something out. The mortgage payment is due next week, and Samantha's already talked to 3 realtors. Nobody will be able to sell the house fast enough to cover what we owe. I poured myself a glass of tea, the ice cubes clinking against crystal that had been a wedding gift from my own mother. That sounds like a problem you and Samantha will need to solve together. Perhaps it's time to live within your actual means. Our means? He laughed bitterly. Everything we have is because of you. You created this lifestyle for us. And that was my mistake. I took a sip of tea, letting the familiar taste of mint and honey center me. I thought I was helping you build a life. Instead, I helped you build an illusion. One so convincing that you forgot who was holding up the mirrors. His phone buzzed. Probably Samantha, wondering why he hadn't yet fixed everything. Andrew always fixed everything, using my money as his tool. But not this time. Claire's education is secure, I said, watching his face. Her tuition, music lessons, and college fund are in a separate trust that neither you nor Samantha can access. She, at least, will have the chance to earn what she receives. You're choosing her over us? No, Andrew. I'm choosing respect over exploitation, love over manipulation, truth over illusion. I set down my glass. You have 30 days to either secure alternative financing or sell the house. Your father's watch collection alone should cover several mortgage payments. He stiffened. Those watches are my inheritance. And this ranch is mine, I replied. Yet you were willing to drug me. One has to wonder what plans you had for after I was incapacitated. The implications of my words hung in the air between us. Andrew's phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Shame, perhaps, or recognition of how far he'd fallen. You raised me better than this, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. I did. That's why this hurts so much. I turned to go back inside, then paused. Claire is always welcome here should she choose to visit. You and Samantha will need to earn back that privilege. I closed the door behind me, my composure finally cracking as I heard his car door slam and gravel crunch under his retreating tires. Only then did I allow myself to cry. Not for the money, not for the betrayal, but for the little boy who once brought me dandelion bouquets and proudly showed off his report cards. Somewhere along the way, that boy had gotten lost in a maze of entitlement and greed. Perhaps this harsh awakening would help him find his way back. The rain had been falling steadily for hours when Claire showed up on my doorstep. Her violin case clutched to her chest, and her hair dripping onto my welcome mat. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her chin held the same determined tilt I remembered from my own reflection in harder times. Can I stay here for a while, Grandma? She didn't. wait for an answer before stepping inside, leaving small puddles on my hardwood floor. Things are intense at home. I wrapped her in a towel from the linen closet, the same one I'd used to dry her after swimming lessons years ago. Your parents know you're here? I left a note. Mom's been crying all day, and Dad's barely home anymore. He just paces around, the house on his phone, talking about equity lines and emergency loans. She pulled out her phone, showing me a string of increasingly frantic text messages from Samantha. They're selling everything. Dad's watches, Mom's art collection, even the grand piano. I put the kettle on. Some situations demanded more than just tea, so I pulled out the hot chocolate mix I kept for Claire's visits. How much do you know about what's happening? Pieces, she said, settling onto a kitchen stool. I know they tried to hurt you at that lunch. I know you've been paying for everything. Our house, my school, all of it. And I know they're losing it all because of something they did wrong. She wrapped her hands around the mug I offered her. But I don't understand why. Why would they try to hurt you? I sat beside her, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on my roof. Sometimes people convince themselves that wrong actions are justified if they lead to what they want. Like Macbeth, she said quietly. We're studying it in English class. I smiled despite the heaviness in my heart. Trust my granddaughter to find a literary parallel. Yes, something like that. Though hopefully with less tragic consequences. Claire set down her mug and walked over to my study, where papers from the trust were still spread across my desk. I watched as she picked up documents, her eyes widening as she took in the numbers, the years of transactions, the careful notes in my handwriting. All these years, she murmured. Every time they said they were paying for something. She turned to a new stack of papers. My violin lessons, the summer music program in Vienna, my college fund. It was all you? I nodded. I wanted you to have opportunities, but I never wanted you to feel indebted. She continued exploring, her fingers trailing over folders and envelopes, until they stopped at my locked desk drawer. What's in here? For a moment, I hesitated. Then I remembered how secrets and silence had contributed to this whole situation. I retrieved the key from my jewelry box and opened the drawer. Inside were the physical remnants of years of silent support, handwritten notes tracking Andrew's childhood achievements, receipts from Claire's first violin, photos of the Georgetown house before and after renovations, letters I'd written but never sent expressing my hopes and fears for my family's future. At the bottom lay a worn envelope containing James's last letter to me, written the week before his heart attack, where he'd made me promise to give Andrew everything he needed to succeed. Claire sat on the floor, surrounded by these paper memories, reading through them with the careful attention she usually reserved for her sheet music. You kept everything, she whispered. A professor's habit, I said, lowering myself to sit beside her. Documentation matters. She picked up a faded photograph of Andrew at his college graduation, my arm around his shoulders as we both smiled at the camera. He looked so different here. Happier, maybe. He was proud that day, I said, of himself, of his achievements. Sometimes I wonder if making things too easy later took away his chance to feel that kind of pride again. Claire leaned her head against my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was much younger. I'm staying here, she declared, at least until things settle down. I can practice my violin in the sunroom, and my school's only 40 minutes away. Your parents might not approve, I warned her. She straightened up, that familiar, determined look returning. They lost the right to approve of things when they tried to hurt you. Besides, she added, gathering the papers into careful piles, Someone needs to help you organize all this history. Later that night, as the rain finally eased, I heard Claire playing her violin in the guest room. Not her usual classical pieces, but something softer, sadder, yet somehow hopeful. The sound drifted through my old house like a healing spell, turning paper trails of betrayal into possibilities for renewal. I sat at my desk, pulled out fresh paper, and began to write. Dear Claire, there are some things you should know about our family's history, because this time the story would be told not in silence, but in full voice, with all its complex harmonies and discordant truths. The realtor's sign appeared in front of the Georgetown house on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, Samantha was on my front porch, wearing the kind of carefully curated outfit that was meant to convey both affluence and humility. A designer dress paired with minimal jewelry, as if she'd already begun the performance of scaling back. Claire won't answer our calls, she said, declining my offer to come inside. We know she's here. Her violin teacher said she's been practicing in your sunroom. I stood in my doorway, neither inviting her in nor stepping out. Claire is 16. She's old enough to choose where she feels safe. Samantha flinched at the word safe. That lunch. It wasn't my idea. Andrew said we needed to do something before you changed your mind about the trust. He said a mild sedative would just help you sign some papers. Her voice cracked slightly. I never thought that I would switch the plates. I finished for her. Or that I would have been recording everything after months of watching you both act suspiciously. She leaned against one of my porch columns, her perfectly maintained facade beginning to crack. The bank is auditing all of Andrew's accounts. His supervisor said it's routine, but we know better. The neighbors have already noticed the realtor's sign. Do you know what this is doing to our social standing? I imagine it's doing exactly what reality does to illusions, I replied. Dissolving them. We had a meeting with the private school board yesterday, she continued as if she hadn't heard me. Claire's scholarship application for next year. They're questioning everything now that they know the previous payments came from you instead of us. Our country club membership is up for renewal next month. The Baldwin's anniversary gala is in 2 weeks. We're on the host committee, for God's sake. I watched her spiral, listing off all the social commitments and status symbols that had become her measure of worth. The woman who had once shown such promise as a young marketing executive had somewhere along the way transformed into someone who valued appearance over authenticity. The house is worth less than we thought, she admitted finally. The market analysis came back yesterday. Even if we sell it, and Andrew's watches, we'll barely cover what we owe. We'll have to move to an apartment, probably in Arlington or Alexandria. She said these place names as if they were exiled destinations. Many people live happy lives in apartments, I observed. I did, when Andrew was young. You don't understand. This isn't just about where we live. It's about everything we've built. Our whole life is structured around... She paused. Around my money, I finished quietly. That's the reality you're finally facing, isn't it? That everything you thought you built was actually borrowed. Samantha's phone buzzed. Another text from Andrew, most likely. She pulled it out, stared at the screen, and suddenly looked very tired. He's meeting with lawyers tomorrow, talking about challenging the trust rescission. He thinks if we can prove you're being vindictive. I have documentation of attempted drugging, Samantha. Time-stamped recordings, medical reports. Would you like me to continue? She shook her head quickly. He's not thinking clearly. Neither of us are. Yesterday, he suggested we leak stories to the local papers about you having mental issues, claiming you're paranoid and imagining things. Can you believe that? She laughed, a hollow sound. We've become people I don't recognize. From somewhere inside the house, Claire's violin practice began. Bach's Partita, in D minor, the piece she'd been perfecting for months. The notes floated out onto the porch, pure and honest in their complexity. "She plays beautifully," Samantha said softly. I used to sit and listen to her practice, imagining her performing at Kennedy Center someday. Now I realize I was probably just calculating how such a performance would reflect on us. I felt a flicker of compassion, remembering the younger woman who had once shown such genuine enthusiasm for Claire's musical talent. "It's not too late to become someone you recognize again," I said. "But it will require accepting reality, not fighting to maintain illusions." She straightened up, brushing invisible dust from her dress. "The realtor thinks the house will sell within a month. We've already started packing up the less essential rooms." She turned to leave, then paused. "Tell Claire. Tell her we're sorry for everything she's seeing us become." As I watched Samantha walk back to her car, not the usual SUV but a more modest borrowed vehicle, I thought about how quickly carefully constructed facades can crumble when their foundations are revealed to be hollow. Inside, Claire's music reached the most challenging part of the piece, where complexity and clarity danced together in perfect balance. She played it flawlessly, each note ringing with authenticity that no amount of money could buy. The email from Dr. Elena Martinez at the University of New Mexico sat unopened in my inbox for 3 days. Claire noticed me checking it repeatedly during breakfast, always closing it without reading. "What are you afraid of, Grandma?" she asked on the 4th morning, setting down her toast. "You've been staring at that subject line like it might bite you." I smiled at her perception. "It's from an old colleague. We worked together on medieval manuscript preservation before I focused entirely on..." I paused. "On Dad and his needs?" Claire finished gently. "Yes." I finally clicked the email open, Claire reading over my shoulder as she refilled our coffee cups. "Dear Margaret, your work on digital preservation of medieval women's texts was years ahead of its time. We're launching a remote curator position for our new Rural Teachers Historical Archive project. The position requires someone with both academic expertise and practical experience in education. You're the first person I thought of." Claire's hand squeezed my shoulder. "You should do it." "It's been years since I've been in academia," I protested weakly, even as my mind began racing with possibilities. "Things have changed." "Show me," Claire said suddenly. "Show me what you used to do before you became just Andrew's mom or Claire's grandmother." I led her to my study, to the locked file cabinet I hadn't opened in years. Inside were my old research papers, conference presentations, and most precious of all, my photographs of medieval manuscripts, women's texts I'd spent years studying and digitizing. "This one," I said, pulling out a particularly striking image, "is from a 12th century nun's personal diary. See how the illumination in the margins tells a different story than the main text. It's like she was writing 2 narratives at once, the official version and her true thoughts." Claire traced the delicate lines with her finger. "Like you've been doing. All those years of careful financial records while keeping your real feelings hidden." Her insight startled me. "I suppose so. Though I never thought of it that way. What would she think of you now?" Claire asked, gesturing to the manuscript image. "This nun who hid her truth in the margins?" I considered carefully. She would tell me it's time to move my story from the margins to the main text. I spent the rest of the morning composing my response to Elena, while Claire practiced her violin in the sunroom. The familiar academic language came back easily, like muscle memory awakening after a long sleep. I found myself adding suggestions for incorporating music history into the archive, thinking of ways to connect medieval women's songs with contemporary teaching. By afternoon, I had not only accepted the position, but also drafted an outline for a potential paper on digital accessibility in rural education. Claire helped me set up a proper home office, complete with dual monitors she insisted were necessary for modern research work. "Look what I found in the attic," she said later, carrying down a dusty box. Inside was my old academic regalia, the doctoral robes I'd worn to countless graduations and ceremonies. "I remember this," I said, running my hands over the velvet. "Stripes. I used to wear it to department meetings when we had important votes. It made me feel powerful," Claire suggested. "Myself," I corrected. "It made me feel like myself." That evening, as Claire helped me organize my old research materials, my phone buzzed with texts from Andrew. More accusations, more threats about lawyers and trust contests. But for the first time, his words seemed to come from a great distance, like echoes from a life I was slowly but surely leaving behind. "Elena wants to schedule a video call to discuss the project," I told Claire over dinner. "Would you help me set up the camera and lighting properly? Apparently, these things matter now." "Of course," she grinned. "Welcome to 2025, Grandma. Just wait until I show you how to use virtual backgrounds." As we cleaned up the dinner dishes, I found myself humming an old Gregorian chant I'd studied years ago, a woman's prayer for courage in times of change. Claire picked up her violin and began to improvise around the melody, adding layers of complexity to the ancient tune. "What's that piece called?" she asked as she played. "Illuminatio," I replied. "It means enlightenment or bringing to light." "Perfect," she said, continuing to play. "That's exactly what this is." Looking around my study, now transformed into a modern academic workspace, while still honoring the centuries-old texts I loved, I had to agree. This wasn't just a return to my old self. It was an illumination of a new path forward, one where I could be both the careful curator of ancient wisdom and a woman firmly stepping into her future. The news about Andrew's suspension from First Federal Bank arrived through Claire, who overheard it from her friend, whose mother worked in HR. It wasn't just the foreclosure conflict of interest that brought him down. The internal audit had revealed years of misrepresented assets, with my trust payments quietly covering the gaps in their stated income. I was in the middle of my first virtual meeting with the New Mexico archive team when Claire slipped a handwritten note onto my desk. "Dad's clearing out his office. They're giving him 48 hours to leave." I nodded acknowledgement but kept my focus on Elena's presentation about manuscript digitization. On my second monitor, a chat message popped up from one of the rural education coordinators. "Your suggestion about incorporating local oral histories alongside medieval women's narratives is brilliant, Margaret. Where have you been hiding all these years?" "Taking care of other stories," I typed back, thinking how diplomatic that sounded compared to the truth. After the meeting, I found Claire in the kitchen, stirring a pot of her grandmother's pasta sauce, my mother's recipe that I'd taught her last week. "The realtor called," she said without looking up. "They accepted an offer on the house. Way below asking price, but they're desperate now. Mom's looking at 2-bedroom apartments in Alexandria." I settled onto a kitchen stool, watching her adjust the seasoning just as I'd shown her. "How do you feel about all this?" She was quiet for a moment, tasting the sauce thoughtfully. "Honestly, I feel relieved. Like we can finally stop pretending." She added a pinch more basil. "Did you know they used to rehearse their stories before social events? Planning exactly how to describe our vacations or my music competitions to make everything sound perfect." The sauce bubbled gently, filling the kitchen with the scent of tomatoes and herbs. Outside, a summer storm was rolling in across the Catskills, thunder rumbling in the distance. "They're coming here tonight," Claire said finally. "Dad texted, said they need to talk to both of us." I had expected this moment, had rehearsed various responses in my head, but now found myself simply tired of planning defenses against their manipulations. "What time?" "After dinner." I told them they could come at 8. She stirred the sauce one final time. "I'm making this for us first. They don't get to have any." The protectiveness in her voice made me smile, despite everything. "Your mother used to cook, you know. Before the house in Georgetown, before the private chefs. She made excellent cherry pie." "Really?" Claire looked surprised. "She never cooks, now. Says it's not worth the effort when you can hire people who do it better." At precisely 8 o'clock, headlights swept across my front windows. 2 car doors slammed, not the quiet purr of luxury vehicles, but the metallic thunk of something older, borrowed or rented. They stood on my porch, looking diminished somehow. Andrew's bespoke suits had been replaced by department store business, casual. Samantha's designer handbag was conspicuously absent. But it was their expressions that showed the real change. The careful mask of superiority had cracked, revealing something raw and uncertain underneath. "The board meeting was this morning," Andrew said after they'd settled stiffly onto my living room couch. They asked for my resignation, effective immediately." "The severance?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "None. They're calling it termination for cause." He stared at his hands. "The country club dropped our membership, too. Apparently, financial impropriety violates their code of conduct." Samantha touched his arm gently, the first genuine gesture I'd seen. Between them in years, we found an apartment in Alexandria. It's not what we're used to, but it's close to a metro station. I've updated my marketing resume. Some of my old clients might. "Have you considered Norfolk?" I interrupted quietly. "The cost of living is lower, and there's a strong arts community. Good violin teachers for Claire when she visits." They both looked startled at the practical suggestion, as if they'd expected either accusations or rescue, but not this calm discussion of their future. "We've lost everything," Andrew said, his voice catching. "The house, my career, our reputation." "No," I corrected gently. "You've lost the illusion of everything. Now you have the chance to build something real." Claire, who had been silent until now, spoke up from her perch on the piano bench. "I have a recording of that lunch, you know. The whole thing. Grandma's not the only one who's learned to protect herself." Andrew's face crumpled. "Claire, we never meant to get caught," she finished. "To have your perfect facade crack, to face consequences." The storm outside had drawn closer, lightning illuminating the room in brief, harsh flashes. In that stuttering light, I saw my son clearly for the first time in years, not as the polished banker he'd become, but as the lost boy who'd tried to buy his way into feeling secure. "We can't fix this with money or influence anymore," Samantha said softly. "Can we?" "No," I agreed. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing." 3 weeks after Andrew and Samantha moved to Norfolk, Claire came to me with a proposal. "I think we should invite them for Thanksgiving," she said, practicing her scales in the sunroom. Not here. They're not ready for that. But maybe at a restaurant halfway between. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing digital manuscripts for the New Mexico project. Are you sure you're ready for that? She adjusted her violin strings thoughtfully. Mom called yesterday. She's working as a marketing coordinator at a local art center. Entry-level position, but she actually sounded real. No fake enthusiasm, no social posturing. She asked about my music without trying to turn it into some achievement story. The autumn light filtered through the windows, casting warm patterns on the floor. Outside, the first leaves were starting to turn. Nature's reminder that change was constant and necessary. Dad's working at a regional bank, Claire continued. As a junior loan officer, he says it's humbling to start over at his age. But... She paused, drawing her bow across the strings. He told me he sleeps better now. No more lying awake wondering when everything would fall apart. I saved my work and closed the laptop. And how do you feel about all these changes? Honestly, it's weird seeing them live in a small apartment, drive used cars, worry about basic bills. But they're more like people now, not characters in some perfect family story they were trying to tell. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. They'd been brief, hesitant messages lately, usually asking about Claire, but sometimes sharing small details about their new life. No demands, no manipulation, just careful attempts at connection. There's a nice restaurant in Allentown, I suggested. Equal distance for all of us. Claire nodded, beginning to play a gentle melody. Not her usual classical pieces, but something softer, improvised. I'll tell them. But I have conditions. Oh, no pretense, no fake politeness. We talk about what happened. Really talk about it. And they have to listen when we tell them how their actions affected us. I thought about my latest research paper, analyzing how medieval women used margins to speak their hidden truths, bringing everything from the margins to the center. I murmured. Exactly. Claire smiled, understanding immediately. No more hidden stories. That evening, I sent Andrew a text. Claire suggests Thanksgiving in Allentown. Neutral ground. Time to write a new story, perhaps? His response came hours later. We'd like that. If you'll both have us. No more scripts this time. Just truth. I showed the message to Claire, who was curled up on the window seat with one of my old medieval literature books. It's a start, she said, turning a page carefully. A small one, but real. Like your scales, I observed. Building something authentic, note by note. She picked up her violin, beginning to play the piece she'd been improvising earlier. I think I'll call this one Reconciliation in D minor, she said with a small smile, still working on the middle part. Aren't we all? I replied, listening to her work through the complex melody, each note an honest attempt at something new and true. The restaurant in Allentown was neither expensive nor cheap, a comfortable middle ground that felt appropriate for this first careful step toward reconciliation. Claire and I arrived early, watching the November snow dust the parking lot through the restaurant's wide windows. They're here, Claire said, straightening in her seat as a modest sedan pulled in. No more luxury SUV, no designer outfits as they walked toward the entrance. Just Andrew and Samantha, in sensible winter coats, carrying a small gift bag that seemed to weight them down with its significance. The initial greetings were awkward, everyone hyper-aware of maintaining appropriate distance while trying to bridge the emotional gap that had grown between us. A waitress led us to a quiet corner booth away from the holiday crowd. "We brought something," Samantha said after we'd ordered, pulling a carefully wrapped package from the gift bag. "We found it while unpacking in Norfolk." Inside was a framed photograph I'd almost forgotten about. Andrew at 7, sitting on my lap during my office hours, both of us laughing as he attempted to grade papers with a red crayon. The simple wooden frame was new, nothing like the expensive ones that had decorated their Georgetown house. "I remember that day," Andrew said softly. "Dad took the picture. You were explaining Chaucer to your students, and I insisted on helping. You marked every paper with a big red A," I recalled, touching the glass gently. My students were thrilled. Claire studied the photo with intense interest. "Dad looks happy. Real happy. Not Georgetown party happy." "We were," I said, meeting Andrew's eyes. "Before money became the measure of everything." The waitress brought our appetizers, simple shared plates that we would have once considered beneath us at family gatherings. Samantha served others before herself, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "The Art Center job," she began, hesitantly. "It's teaching me things about value that isn't measured in dollars. The local artists we work with, they create beautiful things with whatever they have. No fancy galleries, no prestigious buyers, just authentic expression." "Like Claire's new compositions," I offered, extending a small bridge. "I'd like to hear them sometime," Samantha said, then quickly added, "When you're ready, Claire. No pressure." Claire nodded, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "Maybe. I'm working on something about family. It's complicated, lots of dissonance, but moving toward harmony, slowly." "Like us," Andrew said quietly. "Mom, about that lunch. Not here," I interrupted gently. "We'll talk about it, but not today. Today is about seeing if we can simply be present with each other, honestly and without pretense." He nodded, relief mixing with disappointment on his face. "The new job. It's actually teaching me about ethical lending, helping people build realistic futures instead of dangerous illusions." The irony isn't lost on me. The main courses arrived, and we fell into an easier rhythm, sharing simple observations about our new lives, carefully avoiding the performative stories that had once dominated our family dinners. Claire told them about helping me with my digital archive work. Samantha described a community art project she was coordinating. Andrew admitted to taking financial planning classes at the local community college. "Starting over," he said, "but this time, building something real." As we finished our meal, Claire pulled out her phone and showed them a video of her latest performance. Not at a prestigious venue, but at a local nursing home near our ranch. The piece she played was one of her own compositions, raw and so honest in its emotion. "It's beautiful," Samantha whispered, tears in her eyes, "because it's truly you." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the parking lot in a clean white sheet. Nature's way of offering a fresh start. We said goodbye with careful hugs, promises to email, and an understanding that rebuilding trust would take time. In the car heading home, Claire played with her phone's music app, composing something new. "That wasn't terrible," she said finally. "They seemed different." "They are different," I replied. "We all are." The invitation to be a keynote speaker at the Digital Humanities Conference arrived on a bright December morning. Elena had forwarded it with a simple note. "They specifically requested you after reading your paper on integrating medieval women's voices into rural education. Time to step back into the spotlight, Margaret." Claire found me staring at the Thor email in my study, surrounded by the digital archives I'd been curating for the past months. "You're going to say yes?" she said. Not question, but a statement of fact. "It's in Santa Fe," I mused. "Next spring. I haven't given a keynote in years." "I could come with you," she offered, settling into the window seat that had become her favorite spot for practicing violin. "Spring break lines up perfectly. Besides, I've been helping with the digital archiving. I could present the music integration portion." My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "Passed my ethical lending certification. First in the class. Thought you should know." These small updates had become more frequent, each one a tiny brick in rebuilding trust. "Dad's doing better," Claire commented, reading the message over my shoulder. "He called yesterday. Talked about maybe teaching financial literacy at the community center. Giving back," he said. I began drafting my acceptance email for the keynote, thinking about how to structure a presentation that would weave together medieval manuscripts, modern technology, and the importance of preserving authentic voices. "Your father always was a good teacher," I said, when he focused on helping rather than impressing. "Like you," Claire said, picking up her violin. "Speaking of which, the nursing home asked if we could do monthly performances. They said your medieval music lectures are as popular as my concerts." I smiled, remembering how alive I'd felt explaining the hidden meanings in ancient texts to an audience that understood all too well about unspoken truths. "We could develop a proper program. Medieval music and its modern interpretations. Already working on it," she grinned, playing a few bars of what sounded like a modernized Gregorian chant. "Mom's helping too, actually. The art center where she works is interested in collaborative projects." The mention of Samantha no longer brought tension to the room. Her transformation from social climber to community arts coordinator had been genuine, if unexpected. Last week, she'd sent Claire a simply framed photo of her first student art showcase. No designer labels or catered affairs, just proud local artists displaying their work. "I've been thinking," Claire said, setting down her violin, "about next year's college applications. I want a double major in music performance and medieval studies." I looked up from my keynote draft, surprised. "That's an unusual combination." "Maybe," she shrugged. "But watching you these past months, how you've connected centuries-old voices to modern stories, how you've helped people find their authentic expressions, it's shown me that old and new can create something meaningful, together." My computer chimed with another email from Elena. "The rural teachers are asking for more content. Your digital manuscript workshops have waiting lists. We need to talk about expanding the program." Claire read it and smiled. "Remember when you thought you were too out of touch with academia to do this?" I thought about the past year, how losing my role as the family's silent benefactor had freed me to reclaim my voice as a scholar, teacher, and woman with her own story to tell. "Sometimes," I said, "we have to lose what we think we are to become who we're meant to be." "Like that manuscript you showed me," Claire nodded. "The one with the nun's hidden messages in the margins. She probably never imagined her words would help people centuries later." I began typing my keynote outline. Voices from the margins. Digital preservation as modern illumination. Outside, snow was falling again, each flake adding to the clean white page of our new story. "By the way," Claire added, returning to her violin, "Dad and Mom asked if they could attend your keynote. They want to understand this part of your life they never appreciated before." I kept typing, letting the familiar academic language flow, while Claire's music filled the room. Ancient rhythms meeting modern melodies, creating something entirely new and truthful. The Santa Fe Conference Center buzzed with anticipation as I adjusted my presentation slides. In the front row, Claire sat between Andrew and Samantha, her violin case propped carefully against her chair. They had driven from Norfolk together, sharing a modest hotel room nearby, a far cry from the luxury accommodations they once would have demanded. "Ready?" Eleanor asked, checking the microphone. "We have over 300 attendees. Your work on combining medieval manuscripts with modern rural education has caused quite a stir in academic circles." I glanced at my family, remembering another time I'd felt this mixture of nervousness and excitement. My first lecture after James died, when I'd had to reshape my entire world. "More than ready," I replied. "It's time to bring hidden voices into the light." My keynote began with Claire playing her modern interpretation of a 12th century chant, the same one we'd discovered in the manuscripts months ago. The melody soared through the auditorium, bridging centuries with each note. When she finished, I stepped to the podium. "For years," I began, "I studied how medieval women hid their truths in the margins of manuscripts, writing their real stories in the spaces between official narratives. What I never expected was how this ancient practice would help me understand my own story of silence and revelation." From my spot on stage, I could see Andrew's face as he truly listened, perhaps for the first time, to my professional passion. Samantha was taking notes, her marketing experience now focused on helping local artists find their voices. Both of them had learned to sit comfortably with simple clothing and honest work, their former facades replaced by something more genuine. The presentation flowed into a discussion of digital preservation techniques, but woven throughout was the theme of authentic expression finding its way from margins to mainstream. When I clicked to the final slides, images of rural students engaging with ancient texts through modern technology, Claire stood up again. "My grandmother taught me that every voice deserves to be heard," she announced, lifting her violin. "This piece is called Margins to Center. It's about our family's journey from artificial perfection to genuine connection." The music she played captured everything: the pain of betrayal, the courage of confrontation, the tentative steps toward reconciliation, and finally, the emergence of new harmony. In the audience, I saw Samantha wipe away tears, while Andrew sat straight-backed, pride replaced by genuine appreciation. Afterward, during the reception, my family helped me answer questions from colleagues and rural educators. Andrew spoke thoughtfully about the parallels between ethical financial practices and preserving authentic narratives. Samantha connected with art educators about bringing historical manuscripts to community centers. "Professor Harrison," a young graduate student approached, "your work on digital accessibility in rural areas is revolutionary. How did you maintain your academic focus while managing family obligations?" I caught Claire's eye across the room, saw her subtle smile. "Actually," I replied, "I lost my focus for many years, buried under the weight of silent giving. This project represents my return to authenticity, personally and professionally." That evening we had dinner at a small local restaurant. No pretense, no performance, just family sharing a meal and real conversation. Andrew talked about his community college students, Samantha about her local artists collective, Claire about her upcoming college auditions. "I've been thinking," Andrew said, pushing his plate aside, "about writing an ethical banking guide for community organizations. Something about recognizing the difference between growth and greed, with real case studies?" I asked, remembering his former life of financial manipulation. Yeah, he nodded, understanding my reference. Very real. Later, in my hotel room, I finished my final project report for Elena. The rural education program had exceeded all expectations, with waiting lists for every workshop. But the real success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the stories being preserved, the voices being heard, the truths emerging from margins everywhere. Claire's violin music drifted through the wall from her adjoining room. She was composing again, weaving ancient rhythms into modern melodies. The sound mingled with the desert wind outside my window, carrying the promise of stories yet to be told. I opened my laptop to begin work on my next paper. From silence to symphony, the architecture of authentic voice in digital ages. The cursor blinked on the empty page. Not an ending, but a continuation. An invitation to keep writing our true stories, generation after generation, each voice clear and honest and free.